I've lived through so many wars. The entire area I lived my life in is almost completely decimated.
Explain what life was like before 7th of October.
I think you would be surprised by how much faith dire situations give you.
Were you free?
Describe free. Any people put under extreme oppression and constant violations of their rights, they will rise up and their faith will increase.
At the time of recording, the death toll in Gaza has reached above 10,000, yet the so-called international community, in reality the Western nations, are deaf to the cries under the rubble. The Israeli war machine no longer worries about red lines as they act with complete impunity. If the hypocrisy of the West was not evident before the crisis, it is clear now that the liberal world order was never meant to safeguard the lives and honor of those it deems lesser people. Today, I speak to Amr Abdul Latif, who was until recently a resident and citizen of Gaza. He came to the UK to study his postgraduate degree at St Andrews University and now works as a software developer. The Western press, even those that show a little empathy, present the people of Gaza as lesser human beings who do not have dreams and aspirations like the rest of us, who are either pitied or presented as subhuman. I want to understand what life has been like since 2007 when Israel announced its siege and what the average person in Gaza actually believes. Amr Abdul Latif, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. It's very nice to be here. I've been a long time fan of the podcast and I'm very happy to be finally talking with you in here.
Barakallah fiqh. In fact, for our viewers, we met on one of the protests. We bumped into each other and got speaking.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah, I mean, from our first maybe 5 minutes into the discussion, I asked you need to come on the podcast because, subhanallah, your story is really amazing. And I pray that, well, let's actually start with your family. We've been watching the scenes on social media and it's just heartbreaking. I mean, how's your family at the moment?
When it comes to my family, my family fled from Gaza City to the southern part of the Strip. If we want to draw a scene of what's happening, just so viewers could have a better idea, because it's very easy to see the images and not really understand the level of destruction that Gaza is seeing right now. I think is unforeseen, unprecedented. I mean, in many of the conflicts of this century, and even from World War II, it's an insane level of destruction. I've lived through so many wars. I've lived through the Civil War in 2006. I lived through 2008, 2009, Al-Furqan War. I lived through 2012, the war when Israel decided to bomb one of the top military leaders in Al-Qassam Brigade. I lived through 2014, a 51-day war, which was massive in its scale. It's a 51-day war. It's unusual for Israel to go for a long war, and that was one of them. And I lived through all the escalations from then until 2021, including the Great March of Return and some of the smaller conflicts that happened as well, like escalations every now and then that would last for a day or 2 or 3 days, until 2021, which was a 12-day confrontation that kind of changed the equations. And I lived through the ones after, when Israel just out of the blue decided to target some of the top military leaders in Islamic Jihad party and Sarai al-Quds, their brigades. What I need to get across is the level of destruction we're seeing now. If you combine all the confrontations we've had before, and you add on top of them many of the other conflicts that the world is seeing right now, it could probably just still not match it. When I want to just describe a small image, usually in wars, Israel doesn't target heavily populated areas. It usually decides to target some houses, things there are going to be a few people there. If I do a massacre there, not a lot of people will notice. It won't make big news, and I won't have to explain myself, basically. They then, as situations came and went, they started raising that level to start targeting high-rise buildings in Gaza, like towers, like 10 to 12-story buildings. And each one of them is a landmark in Gaza because we don't have that many of them. So when they take any one of them, we feel it. We feel it. It's a strong statement of, it's a terrorizing statement that you can't do anything to us and we'll keep you down. So whenever that happens, it's a huge pain. But then they started this war. They started this attack with targeting some of the most famous high-rise buildings in Gaza, like Burj Watan and Burj Palestine, and some others. And then they started targeting the heavily the densely populated areas, completely ignoring what we've come to know throughout the many years. So people usually fled from their houses to the to the densely populated areas. That's the usual. That's what we've been doing.
Common sense, yeah.
Yes, and my family did that at the beginning of the war because we know how Israel deals with things. We understand it. So my family did that. We went from Rimal al-Janubi, which is the place where we're in, to Al-Rimal. Basically, I don't know how to, you don't know Gaza, so you wouldn't understand really what I'm talking about. But we went to Al-Rimal. But the first thing Israel said on that war was evacuate Al-Rimal because I want to bomb it, right? That's the first thing that happened. Now Al-Rimal,
this is a civilian area.
This is let's say, the most central part of Gaza. It is the place, like the economic hub. There's so many shops there. There's a few malls because we don't have many of them. There's a few malls there. It's full of people. It has all the banks, the main branches of all the banks. Like it's the main area. They started this war by bombing the entire area of Al-Rimal, including Al-Shuhada Street, including the two high-rise towers I've talked about, like Burj Watan and Watan and Palestine towers. The entire area I lived my life in up to this point is almost completely decimated, including the university I studied in, Islamic University of Gaza, including the place where I used to sit around with my friends. Well, we used to sit in many places, but that's one of the main places, Al-Katiba field, which is opposite of Islamic University of Gaza towards the sea. They bombed that. They bombed the entire region. They even bombed Al-Katiba Mosque, one of the most famous mosques in the city. And I have many friends all around that area. The place where I used to live in, the same building I used to live in, was bombed. I have many friends living inside it, and I still don't know if they made it out or not.
These are your school friends, your childhood friends?
My friends from my entire life. Gaza is really small. We all know each other. If anything happens to anyone, we all know. We all know. Basically, we're 2 million people, yes, but we're living in such a small area that we simply all know each other. You wouldn't walk in the street without saying hi to a few dozen people. And it pains my heart to say this, but I think it's going to take decades for Gaza to go back where it was, and it may never go back to where it was.
And how's your family?
So my family right now made it to the southern part.
Okay.
So they fled to Al-Rimal and then fled from Al-Rimal to another place, but then fled from that other place to the south. No, actually back to their house, because their house is not in a densely populated area. And since they're bombing densely populated areas, we might as well just go back to our house. Well, we know it. We know the area. We have We've solar cells in the house, so like at least we would have electricity.
Yeah.
But they started threatening with the ground invasion and everything, and the ground invasion would most likely get to us, and evidently it has. So right now the tanks are near my house. There is clashes there, and there it's most likely hit at least by a few tank shells and artillery shells.
Yes.
But my family made it to the southern part. Now, if I want to talk a bit more about my family, I could tell you about my cousin Hiba. She was killed with her husband and all her children in an Israeli airstrike just a few days after like the war started. She has like 3 children. Each one of them is like 4, 6, and 8. They're really, really small children, young children, I mean. And I also have 2 others of my cousins. And now, in Gaza, we say my cousin. If it's your father's cousin, it's your cousin as well.
Yes.
I don't know if you have that as well.
Yes, we do. Yes.
You do have it.
Yes.
Okay. So I would say my cousins, if they're my father's cousins, and if they're my father's cousins' sons as well, we still say cousin.
Yes.
So 2 others of my, so they're not direct cousins. So, but they're very close family. So 2 others of my cousins as well were killed with their wives and children. And as the war is going on, every single day we're losing so many great people. And if I were to just continue talking about the people I know who we've lost, it would probably take the entire podcast. So yeah, one person that we lost this morning was Professor Ismail Astal, a renowned professor in mathematics in Gaza, one of the geniuses in Gaza. It's a huge loss to lose that person. I studied under him, and so did generations of students in the Islamic University. But it's a huge loss. Now the entire university is gone, and he's gone too, and as well as like many other professors as well in the university. So that's only today, this morning. And from his family, just I'll end with this one.
Yeah.
His family is Al-Astal family. I don't know if you've heard about the report that the Ministry of Health released, detailing the names and ID numbers and ages of around 7,000 killed people. In that report, which came out like a week and a half ago, 88 people of Al-Astal family were killed. 88 people. Just imagine that number. 88 people. And this morning they targeted the same family again in Khan Yunis. Now Khan Yunis is in the southern part. It is the supposed safe part.
Yes.
And they targeted them again and are killing again of the same family. And I think they may have crossed the 100 threshold of deaths in the same family. Now you can imagine what that means for the rest of the people.
Amr, is there any doubt in your mind that this is collective punishment? I mean, the Israeli argument is that we're targeting Hamas operatives in various parts of the city, and they hide behind human shields. They hide behind civilians. In your mind, is this really trying to subdue an entire population?
In terms of like Israel's history, like anyone that knows anything about Israel's history would know that in its doctrine, collective punishment is something that they know and do in every single like as a response to every single violence from the Palestinian side. In history, it used to be like if a person resisted, right? Say for example they resisted a soldier and managed to get that soldier, right? They would see where that person is from, which village he's from, and they would go on a pogrom just to hit and kill and burn that village. And that continues to this day in the West Bank. So for example in Hawara, this is very recent, like I'm not even talking about the current conflict in like before 7th of October, but it's still very recent. Hawara. One person from Hawara, a resistance fighter, basically. He killed a few people from Israel. I think it was 1 or 2 people. Now, on the what happened afterwards was the Israeli militias, the terrorist militias, like the settler terrorist militias, went into Hawara and burned so many of their properties and shot at people in the streets. They razed the city. And the Minister of Finance came out and said, I want to wipe Hawara off the map. And, that statement was condemned by Western politicians because it happened before the 7th of October. But after the 7th of October, these statements became well known and even encouraged, I would say. From like, no one really cares if anyone says anything right now in terms of collective punishment. As we've seen, like yesterday, no one really cared about that piece of news. But the Minister of Heritage, we're talking about ministers here in Israel, said that bombing Gaza with a nuke is an option. Now, that has many implications. One of them is definitely collective punishment. The other is genocide.
Yes.
The third is Israel has nukes that it's been hiding for decades and not saying anything about them, and it's willing to use them with full backing from the US and its partners. So we're looking at an insane government full of fascists that are willing to do anything to subdue the Palestinian population. And the 7th of October is no different. Collective punishment is their strategy. They've done it in Lebanon. The Dahiya doctrine, it became like the whole doctrine became like it started. They started calling it the Dahiya doctrine to refer to Al-Dahiya, which is a place in southern Lebanon.
Right.
Where they razed an entire city, completely bombed it to the ground as a response to Hezbollah, like I think it was in 2000. That's when it was called the Dahiya Doctrine, for example, that level of carpet bombing an entire city. So it's something that they have in their strategies. It's quite striking that you still find some people that aren't that don't really know, that are willing to entertain these ideas of Israel is just targeting Hamas members, but then it just ends up somehow killing more than 10,000 people right now.
Do you think they believe that, or do you think they're willfully ignorant when they think that?
So I think it's a bit of both. Before, how would I explain this? I think in terms of them being willfully ignorant, I think the vast majority of them aren't. The vast majority of them are deceived, brainwashed. They're just simply, they even have a word for it, like called Pallywood. You ever hear of it? So they think that we just make everything up.
Yes.
So we're not really suffering.
Right.
We're not really dying.
Yeah.
Our bombs aren't being destroyed. Our homes aren't being destroyed. Our kids aren't really under the rubble.
But these are Israelis. I'm thinking more Americans. The Americans
just
media.
simply don't know anything.
Really? It's just ignorance.
Yeah, just like complete ignorance. And that's my perception, to be honest. And I haven't been to the US, and I honestly don't want to. But I don't know the full image of what's going through the people in America, like in the US. What goes through their minds? I have no idea. How could they even look at what their weapons are doing? It's literally all their weapons.
Yes.
And then still maintain an idea that the US is trying to maintain peace. Like, how could you say that? And then the US goes ahead and says, well, we want Palestinians to live in peace. And then they go give Israel like billions, like just now $14.3 billion. And then they just announced yesterday another 290 million in weapons. And then they look at Palestinians and say, we want them to live in a better situation. What do you mean better situation?
Yeah.
When you're funding one side and then they entertain the thought of a two-state solution, that, oh, we're still on a two-state solution, we want a two-state solution, but they never even try to enforce anything on Israel. So how do you expect it to give up some land if you don't exert any sort of pressure on it?
Can I ask you about, just staying on the theme of Western narratives, we are led to believe that the 7th of October was really when history began. So Hamas undertook this operation. It was a terrorist operation in their eyes, and Israel is responding to its right to defense. It's responding to this operation. And when counter voices talk about context, they quickly shut that down. When we discuss context, explain that to me. Explain what life was like before 7th of October in Gaza and maybe in Palestine generally.
I think one of the problems in this kind of thinking, like the general kind of thinking in here, is people think that Gaza is an isolated instance. It's not related to Palestine.
Right.
And that is an erroneous way of thinking. It's not right.
Right.
Gaza is an integral part of Palestine. We feel every hit that happens in the West Bank. We feel everything that happens in Jerusalem, in Al-Aqsa Mosque. We feel everything that happens to the women of Hebron. And we obviously feel the economic crisis in Gaza, which is not something simple. And even though the resistance has gone through fights for economic reasons, purely economic reasons, there's no doubt about it. It's trying to get something out of Israel, basically, get some concessions. But we still feel it when anything happens around the West Bank and around the entire area of Palestine, even including the Palestinians inside the occupied territories, what's known now as Israel.
Yeah.
If we want to look at just a tiny bit of context, of what was happening. Gaza's economic situation, as I've said, is one side of it. The situation is obviously terrible. We've had this is going to take a bit of explaining. We've had this thing called the Qatar Fund, basically.
Yeah.
So Qatar used to give money to the as in just pay the salaries of people from Gaza, and then give some of the poor people $100 a month. Now the way that money comes in, it goes through and comes through Erez, basically Erez checkpoint on the the border on the northern side. That was cut off before the war happened. Many Palestinian workers, there are many people, obviously, because Gaza's economic situation is very terrible. You'll find some people even willing to go and work inside the occupied territories.
What they call Israel.
They call Israel. And they're willing to pay them. And they pay them really well, to be honest. So people do that. People go, and there is a quota of how many people Israel would accept to go work there. So that was reduced before the war. That was reduced, I think, severely before the war. So the economic situation is just not stable, as it's always been, but it's also become even more terrible over time.
Yeah.
But it's this time, I don't think it's this time specifically is just not about the economic situation only. That's why it was called Al-Aqsa flood.
Yeah.
It was directed at Al-Aqsa Mosque. So what we've seen in Al-Aqsa in the past, I think Sami did a very good job in explaining the context there. But in Al-Aqsa, they've been going through what we call as التقسيم الزماني والمكاني, which means the time and place division, or I don't know how to explain it, like how to give it a term in English, but the time division in Al-Aqsa Mosque is basically Palestinian people aren't allowed to go inside Al-Aqsa Mosque from, say, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday from 10 to like 6 or whatever, right? So they have a certain times that Al-Aqsa Mosque is reserved for the Jewish population of Israel. Now, that started before 2021 and slowly started expanding. Now, this is like Israel's strategy. They don't do something so striking so quickly. They usually go about it very slowly.
Piecemeal.
So slowly they take piece by piece by piece. And over time, you just end up not having anything. So they started this in 2021, before 2021, like I think a year before 2021, and it started increasing. In 2021, the confrontation called Sayf al-Quds, Al-Aqsa Sword, or Al-Quds Sword, Jerusalem Sword, was mainly because of this. And obviously, as you know, like this was like huge news. Everyone knew about it. People were beaten inside Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they were not allowed. They were sieged inside it, and they went inside and beat them up. And so after that, rather than Israel realizing, or the Israeli entity realizing that the Palestinians will just not sit aside if you do something, if you expand your violations in Al-Aqsa Mosque, they even increased them. So after the war, we've seen a large increase in terms of numbers of settlers and basically settlers that go and like visit Al-Aqsa Mosque. We call it invasion. Invade Al-Aqsa Mosque, including Jordan Peterson, which is very funny. He went with a group of Jewish settlers under Israel's protection, even though if he asked any Palestinian like to come in, he would have been welcome, but he chose that side. Now we know why, but he went in with this group, and over time they increased the numbers. Every day they increased the numbers. And we're seeing it, and they increased the time. And after a bit, they started bringing in like I don't really understand the full side of it, like from a Judaism perspective. I don't really understand it completely.
Right.
But I've read that they've brought 4 cows, red cows, from Texas, as in like to sacrifice. And
why Texas?
Well, they wanted red cows. Basically, they wanted red cows. I don't understand it completely, but the idea is there is a few sacrifices that they need to make before they bring down Al-Aqsa and then build the temple in its place.
Right.
Basically. Yeah. So the way it went is they brought in first the plant sacrifices, and they started walking around with them inside Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, people that know entirely like what Judaism says and all of these ideas, which I'm not really very familiar with, to be honest, know and have warned us about the seriousness of the issue.
Right.
And with the bringing of the cows, it's considered like one of the latest steps, basically, like before they try to bring down Al-Aqsa.
Yes.
And then the Israeli government obviously held a meeting under Al-Aqsa with all the ministers under Al-Aqsa, with its base. Like there was pictures of it as a provocation, obviously. And the internal security minister, time and time again, invades Al-Aqsa Mosque and walks around and takes pictures with the Dome of the Rock to provoke the Palestinian people. Women in Hebron, that's a story I don't think many in the West know about. 4 women in Hebron were stripped naked and searched, and if I remember correctly, even taken photographs of by 50 soldiers, 50 Israeli soldiers, only a few weeks before Al-Aqsa flood, the 7th of October.
Yes.
The women in Al-Aqsa itself were beaten on the grounds of Al-Aqsa and then taken captive or hostage, whichever you like. And our prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners, as well as the administrative detainees. Like they call it administrative detention, but it's basically hostage taking.
Yeah.
Because if you take someone without any charges, basically hostage taking.
This is under martial law. This is under army law. Yeah.
Yeah, so they take anyone they feel like they could possibly make a problem for them, so they take him preemptively.
Really?
And they quote it around with these nice words, but it's hostage taking. And there's more than 1,000 of them in Israeli prisons,
Right.
and they can extend it indefinitely. So we're talking 1,000 people. That's not a small number.
Yeah.
300 of them children, and I think more than 200 women as well. That's very serious for us Palestinians. Our women matter so much to us. Like they mean so much to us. Their honor means too much to us. We're willing to give lives to protect their honor as well. So taking all of that stuff into context and many more that I probably just simply don't know, and you'll end up with a situation that was reaching a boiling point,
Right.
with no possibility for it to. There's no peaceful venues. I'll tell you something. I'll
Yeah.
tell you something. A few weeks before Al-Aqsa flood, I was very depressed when I saw Netanyahu's map. You remember that?
Yeah. At the UN.
Yes.
Yeah.
I saw Netanyahu's map that does not include any sort of Palestinian entity. Even steals the Golan Heights completely, which is very interesting to see. And kind of like very rude as well in front of the United Nations and people applauding. And then we kept hearing of the Saudi normalization deal, which we could get to talk a bit about normalization later.
Yeah.
But as you're seeing all of these things, you're feeling, I literally felt this. I felt as a Palestinian, we simply lost. We simply lost. There is no way. Like I reached a level of despair, and I'm pretty sure that was shared by many other Palestinians. I talked about this to two of my colleagues in here in London.
Yeah.
I stopped a meeting just to talk about this.
Really. Non-Muslim colleagues.
Yeah. One of them is from Colombia and the other is from Nigeria.
Yes.
Both of them are Christians.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think both are agnostic, but born Christians.
Yeah.
And I talked with them and said, guys, I'm really depressed. I think there is no way for us to get anything. I think we've lost. And I think the world has abandoned us, including all the Arab and Muslim countries. There's no one willing to help us. There's no one willing to fight with us for our cause. And no one seeing us as humans, or no one seeing a possibility for us to move forward. No one seeing the benefit of standing on our side. They're looking at it as some sort of benefit rather than a duty. So I think we've lost. And that made me reach a level of despair that I just couldn't continue working fine for 2 days. I just couldn't. But then, fast forward a few weeks, Al-Aqsa flood happened. I'm pretty sure I wasn't the only one feeling the despair. Let's just keep it at that.
Yes.
I wasn't the only one feeling the despair.
Right.
And we've seen how the entire world completely changed after October the 7th.
Can I ask you about the blockade since 2006, 2007 in Gaza? You've lived most of your life, most of your adult life, in fact, your teenage life under this blockade. Just paint a picture of what that siege or that blockade felt like for you.
The blockade is a tragedy. It's a tragedy, honestly. Now, it's gone through many phases.
Right.
It's gone through many phases. The first phase was the most difficult phase, when people just simply weren't prepared for it. And we were hit very hard by it. Now, I don't know if you know about the calorie equation.
No.
So the Israeli ministers decided to calculate how many calories each Palestinian should have in Gaza, and they would only let in that amount.
Wow.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of their ministers, probably Avigdor Lieberman, which is now a former minister of defense, said, we just want Palestinians in Gaza to have their heads above water, but not drowning. That's a statement he made.
Yes.
So they calculated the calories. So you can just by giving you that example, you should have an idea of the level of control they were exerting.
Yes.
Now, our electricity, evidently, as this war shows, largely comes from their side. They feed us the electricity and charge us too much money for it.
Yeah.
Most people think it's some sort of charity, but we actually pay too much money. I think we pay more than the UK in terms of like how much money we pay for electricity. But we only get like 8 hours a day or less if they decide to just try to trigger us a bit. So they could kill a few people or whatever. Like they keep making these decisions. So we've gone through so much. In the first years of the blockade, they coincided with the war in 2007, 2008, the Furqan War. I think they called it Cast Lead, Operation
yes.
Cast Lead.
Yeah.
We call it Al Furqan. So they bombed the electricity power station. I mean, in Gaza. It's the only one, and it never recovered from then until now. It never recovered, but it partially recovered, not completely. So we have. I think it's feeding like. You should probably look it up. Like there's more concrete information you could find, but I think it's around 10%. I think it's around 10% of what Gaza needs. Like that's what it can generate, and then Israel feeds us or the Israeli entity feeds us around like 40%, and Egypt feeds us like 20 or 10 or something. And that's only in terms of like power. In terms of internet, as we've seen in this war, it's completely from their side. So they can just switch it off whenever they decide. And our Palestinian telecommunication companies aren't able, let's say, to bring in other sources of internet into the strip.
Yeah.
That's in terms of internet. So when the war in 2008, 2009 happened, I think if I remember correctly, we had 6 full months of no power. That's if I remember correctly. I was pretty young back then. But then we started going through different phases. I remember one of the phases was people were using cooking oil as fuel.
Right.
And that was one of the worst periods of my life in Gaza. The smell in the streets, it's horrific. And
how old were you at the time?
I think around like 14, 15. It's horrific.
Really?
I pray you never have to smell it. It's horrific. It's really, it's terrible. And people were using it as fuel because there was just simply no fuel. And as the time went on, we went through different phases. But I think most of it comes down to Hamas's competence. When they first came to power, they were just simply incompetent.
Really?
They couldn't really, they thought they could govern everything on their own.
Yeah.
That was one of their mistakes. But over time, they started to learn and get experience in terms of like dealing with other nations and everything, especially Egypt. So over time, things started to loosen up. In terms of freedom of movement, that is the worst thing about Gaza. Like we could dedicate an entire question, like talk about it. Like I could talk about it. It'll probably take me around 10 minutes to explain the entire thing. It's not simple. That is and was one of the most difficult things about Gaza. In the past 2 years, it's become easier, but it's still not that good, right? It's still not good, to be honest. So historically, during Hosni Mubarak's time in Egypt, the way the Egyptian authorities deal with Palestinians it's terrible. It's dehumanizing. And it's surprising to say that because you would expect Egyptians like to feel some sort of like, I mean the authorities obviously, the people obviously like all love Palestinians and would fight for them, but the authorities there's some sense of enmity and dehumanization from many of their members. Some of their members are good, but the majority treat us in a very inhumane way. So you'd be left waiting like for hours upon hours just because some officer decided to leave you waiting. So during Hosni Mubarak's time, it was a bit difficult. I went for Umrah with my family during Hosni Mubarak's time. We enjoyed the Umrah, obviously, but
Was that the first time you left?
That was the first time I left Gaza, yes. But it was a very, very tiring trip. Let's just leave it at that.
The bureaucracy, the administration, you mean?
It's not in terms of bureaucracy. It's just dehumanizing. You're just left waiting for 7 hours because they just want to leave you waiting. There's just simply no justification for it. It just seems like it just seems like they have like a policy of doing this to Palestinians. During Mohammed Morsi's time, I went out for another Umrah with my family. That one was simple. We were let in immediately, and we faced no problems whatsoever. But then after that, when Sisi came to power, things became even worse than when Mubarak was there. Hosni Mubarak was there. And when I say worse, I mean it could reach the level. Like I went to Turkey in 2016 during Sisi's time. I think that was like more of a miracle how I actually made it. The border would close for like 4 or 5 months at a time, and then they would open it for one day, let in 200 people, let out 200 people, and then close it back again.
Right.
And then of the 200 they let in, they would probably question some of them and then return them back. So when I went in, I had another guy coming with me for the same scholarship in Turkey. Like it's an exchange scholarship, Erasmus actually.
Yeah.
And he was told to go back for no reason. The guy, I simply like, I don't think there's anything that could justify it. Like I was talking with the guy for weeks before we came to the border at the same time. Could have been me. Like he just out of nowhere decided to just send him back with many of the people that made it to their side of the border.
Yeah.
But then I was let through, which is something good. But the way was just was really terrible. Let's not give this too much time. Like.
Yes. Can I ask you about, you mentioned there the civil war between Hamas and Fatah in 2005, 2006, where in effect the two sides, the Palestinian side became split into this bipolar division. Looking back, was that a disaster really for Palestinians? I mean, how did you see it? I know you were very young. How did your family see that at the time?
I think there's many sides to this question. It's a political question after all. So different people will give you different answers. But the fact is, we had a democratic election, the first time in our history. I obviously didn't partake in it because I was too young. But Hamas won, fair and square. They won.
Yeah.
What should have happened is both sides made mistakes that day.
Right.
The Western side of the world didn't accept the result of the elections simply because they said, well, if Hamas comes to power and they simply don't agree to the prior agreements we had with the PA, then we can't really deal with them, can we? Right. That's their decision. So Hamas said, well, we can't agree on the previous ones because some of them coincide, have a direct conflict with our whole existence as a political party, mainly recognizing Israel as a sovereign country deserving of taking some of our land, basically. That is Hamas's position. But Hamas said, we're willing to negotiate new deals along the same lines. We're willing to negotiate. So let's have a round of negotiations. The Western world didn't like that as an answer, and they simply didn't recognize the elections. What Fatah what Fatah thought afterwards was, well, if the world is not going to accept the elections, who cares? We'll just stay in power.
Right.
And Hamas can just go do whatever. They can just get back scurrying to their whatever they came from. Now that obviously resulted into higher tensions because ministers were trying to get into their ministries that they were elected for and chosen for, but they weren't allowed to. I think what should have happened is both sides should have recognized Hamas's victory in the elections and made concessions. Hamas's main mistake, as I've said, was they thought that they could rule perfectly with no problems whatsoever over a conflicted region, to say the least, a conflicted region under occupation, without making some sort of concessions to the other parties, because it won. Now it's thinking in Western terms, but we're not really in a free and open state that you can make these assumptions. These simply don't apply when you're under occupation. So Hamas made that mistake, and Fatah made the mistake of not giving any concessions whatsoever. They wanted to stay in power. They've been in power for a while. They've been in power for like 6 and 7, so that's 13 years since the Palestinian Authority came into place, like after the Oslo Accords in 1993.
Yeah.
So they weren't willing to give up power. So the overall result was a civil war in which Hamas won. The civil war as well. Fatah members, like especially the top members of Fatah, fled to the West Bank. And then we went through a period of infighting because Hamas wanted to maintain order. Before Hamas came to power, there is something we call Falatan al-Amni, which is I don't know how to translate it correctly, but it could be security chaos. Security chaos, wherein like different tribes would have weapons, would be armed completely, and they would want to exert their dominance over other nearby tribes. Or if any, say for example, you go and have a small dispute with someone of that tribe could hunt you down during the PA's time in Gaza.
Right.
And you could even get killed for it. And we've seen that many times. So the situation in Gaza was terrible. The authorities had complete control to do whatever they wanted with anyone.
So it's very authoritarian.
You could say that. But at the same time, there was no security. There was no security. You couldn't be safe when you leave your house, like especially for women. Yeah. Women couldn't feel safe at all.
And did things change when Gaza was taken over by Hamas?
So when Hamas came to power, they wanted to change things dramatically, and that was one of the main things of their election campaign. They called it تغيير والإصلاح, which means change and
reform.
Reform, yes. Yeah. So they were very serious about this, and they said, we want nothing to do, like we want the security chaos to completely end. So when they came to power, many transgressions happened. Hamas went and fought with the tribes in order to collect their weapons and monopolize the violence in Gaza. So the violence would only belong to the authorities. No one else would have any weapons unless they're registered with the authorities, right? And they created then like some of the police formations. They maintained order.
So things improved
significantly.
Right. Because of course the Western argument is that life under Hamas was akin to life under ISIS. It was like Mosul. It was, an authoritarian state where you couldn't even breathe without the consent of the Hamas government. You seem to be saying it wasn't like that.
I think that's a ridiculous argument, and I think anyone who's been in Gaza can say, like, can attest to that. Like,
were you free?
Describe free.
That's a philosophical discussion.
I wish I could be free. In terms of like saying whatever you wanted, as in any other country, as in any other under any political entity, you will have a few or many, depending on the situation, depending on where you are, some restrictions on what you say. But I would say I never really felt it. I used to openly criticize Hamas's like policies, even to them, like to any person I see from their side. I would criticize, like I say, why did you do this and that? One of the main criticisms that people held and kept in mind and kept talking about for the entirety of Hamas's rule in Gaza was the way they handled the situation after the civil war, the way they handled the tribes. So one of the tribes, for example, was the Dughmush tribe. My brother has many friends in that tribe. And the way Hamas handled the situation was reprehensible. They killed a few people in clashes and like armed fighting, basically. And some of their people also did like transgressed. So people criticized that for ages. Now the person responsible for that in Hamas was dealt with. Like he was frozen. We call it frozen, like as in he no longer is able to continue in his position. And many of the people there like were dealt with like by Hamas authorities, right, especially the transgressors.
Yes.
So in terms of criticism, people in Gaza have always been able to criticize and talk and do whatever. There's one thing I usually say to people that surprises them here. I think outside wars, living in Gaza is the most, I think is the safest, I think Gaza is the safest place to be at outside of wars.
Really?
It is.
Yeah.
In terms of like crime, we simply have none of it.
Really?
We simply have none of it. Like even though there is a dire economic situation, you don't hear about people. Now there is a few, like you do hear about like some crimes like theft or something like that, but you never hear about like murder. You never hear about burglary or like anyone going and stealing things and like going into a bank and then shooting people and like all of these things. They simply don't exist. Women can do whatever they want now, as in like whatever they want. You could obviously, as in an Islamic country, there are some restrictions, but under an Islamic context, they can do whatever they want.
They can walk freely.
They can go. They can even travel on their own. They can leave during the evenings. They can like in some other countries, like Muslim countries, these things can have some restrictions on them. Whereas women in Gaza were like practically free, and we have a Christian community. That's one of the things people don't really seem to know. We have a Christian community in Gaza who just continue to live peacefully. And I have two friends from that community, and they just simply continue to live freely and do whatever they wanted, including like their prayers and everything in their churches. And no one even tried to do anything to them.
Right.
Now, when it came to extremist groups starting to emerge, now with the rise of ISIS, we saw a group starting to emerge in Gaza that is very resembling of what ISIS had.
Takfiri type of group.
Exactly.
Right.
The way Hamas dealt with them was swift and brutal. They immediately captured the entire organization, like, and chucked them in prison immediately. So within reason, you can say and do whatever you want. That's basically how Hamas's rule was in Gaza.
Can I ask you about, I know I haven't called you in today to discuss the wider political context, but in the press, there is a discussion about ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Do you feel that the post-conflict Gaza, whatever that means, will be a more diminished, limited Gaza because great swathes of it will be cleansed and maybe replaced by either Israeli settlements or bigger cordons between so-called Israeli territory and Palestinian territory?
That would be a nightmare. I think if you ask any Palestinian, whether it be in Gaza or in the West Bank, they would give you the same answer. Any person would not want to be under Israeli control. And the PA control does not give you safety, does not give you security, as we've seen in the West Bank throughout the years. The Israeli authorities can just come into the area, barge into anyone's house, get people, imprison them, shoot them in the streets, have checkpoints, strip women naked, as we've seen in Hebron. And an interesting thing, actually, about the Hebron incident is that they announced it.
Israelis?
The Israelis announced
Right.
it
Why?
weeks after it happened.
Why?
It's I can't think of any reason other than provocation. Like the women obviously didn't say it about themselves.
Yes.
Because it's their honor. But the Israelis, on the other hand, came out and said, well, we did this. Now, just imagine the level of humiliation they want to impose on us, because they know it matters a lot to us. So in terms of Israel having free reign to do whatever it wants in Gaza, that is a nightmare. If you ask anyone in the West Bank or in Gaza, if you ask anyone in the West Bank and tell him, would you prefer to live under the Palestinian Authority's security, during which Israel can come in at any time, shoot people, or like capture people and torture them and send them back if they want, or just keep them for months, or under Hamas's rule, wherein we have complete security inside the border of Gaza itself. I don't think it's even a discussion to be had, because simply you have freedom to go from all, like, the northern side of Gaza to the southernmost side of Gaza. You can talk to people, you can do whatever, you can trade, you can leave Gaza and come back, even though there's difficulties around it.
Yes.
But in the end, no one can come barging into your house at 2 a.m. and just capture your children and leave with them. And if you ask anyone in Gaza at the same time, would you prefer to live under Hamas's rule in Gaza or under the PA's rule, as in the West Bank, in like the model we have in the West Bank? I do not think anyone in their right mind would say, would prefer the West Bank's model. I think it would be a nightmare, to say the least.
So just to understand that, under the terms of Oslo, the PA were responsible for municipal activities, but Israeli government was responsible for security and policing. Is that right?
I don't really know about that, to be honest with you, but it wouldn't explain the need for 70,000 members of the Palestinian Authority security forces. They have 70,000 members,
really?
70,000 armed people. Whereas if you put it into context, the military wing of Hamas is estimated to have 30,000 people. So you're talking about an actual, like, almost an army of armed, trained men. But usually the way they conduct their operations isn't to secure their people from Israeli invasions and things like that. It's usually the other way around. It's usually to stop their people from doing any sort of resistance activities against Israel. So they would basically conduct the same kind of operations as the Israeli authorities. Now there are, as a caveat, there are good people in the Palestinian Authority, obviously. There's many good people in Fatah. Many great people in Fatah. And it has a long history of revolutionary ideologies and fighting for them. And fighting genuinely for the freedom of Palestine and for achieving a Palestinian state. But the current iteration of things is highly authoritarian, and I don't think it's genuinely trying to reach a Palestinian state or an end to the conflict at all. I think it's more or less trying to let's just leave it at that. They're not trying to genuinely build a Palestinian state. I don't know about the Oslo Accord, including what you said or not.
Yeah.
So,
Can I ask you? I mean, two more questions. I want to get into the current psychology, I suppose, of the ordinary Palestinian, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza. There is a discussion outside of Palestine. I've never really heard this discussion from within, but that may be just because I haven't studied it enough. That, you know, it's been many years, 75 years, and you know, resistance has failed, in inverted commas. Israel has increased its settlement activity. Palestine today is a stub of a state. You know, it's really not worthy of the name, the label, a state anymore, because of just how much of it has been shred. And so the discussion is, and I was speaking to an imam recently, again outside of Palestine, who was suggesting that maybe it's time we need to think about compromise. Maybe resistance has failed us. Maybe normalization of some kind, like of the kind that the Mohammed bin Salman is currently, the endeavor he's currently engaged in. Maybe that's the only way forward to find some level of peace and contentment for Palestinian people. Is that a discussion within Palestine?
No, I'm from Gaza.
Yeah.
We're completely secluded from the West Bank, so we don't have a full idea of what the regular West Bank person would know, or what would believe, I think.
Yeah.
But we can make some guesses, assumptions. Yeah. I think the idea that the resistance has failed is ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous because if we look at history, did we ever get anything out of the other cause? And did we get anything out of the resistance? Yeah, let's just leave it at a material state, just material. In 2004, Ariel Sharon, the president, the prime minister of Israel at the time, one of the most evil persons in the entire universe, was saying Gush Katif, which is a former settlement in Gaza. They want to bring it back. Right now, you can see the soldiers singing and dancing about it. And Netzarim, the another settlement in southern side of Gaza, are as important as Tel Aviv. He said that in 2004. In 2005, he withdrew from the entire area of the Gaza Strip because of the resistance efforts. The resistance efforts were too strong to the point that he had to make that concession. Now, that was very unpopular in his government because obviously he's a right-wing person and his government is likewise. But he withdrew from the pressure the resistance was making. Now, we gained some sort of autonomy over Gaza as a people, as Palestinian people. It left us in a much better position than being under Israeli security or Israeli jurisdiction or mercy, let's say, under Israeli mercy.
Yeah.
In Lebanon, the only thing that gave them back their territory was resistance from Hezbollah's fights. Now, you could agree or disagree with Hezbollah's ideology. They still had massive fights against Israel, and they managed to win back their territory. Now, since we know that territory was taken back by resistance, if we put it on the side and then think about the other alternative, which is peace and negotiations, right? In 1993, we had the Oslo Accords, which were supposed to give us some sort of a Palestinian state after a few years, and then an airport and a seaport and all of these nice things that people should have to live, and to start a negotiation process to retrieve our prisoners and to build and to work towards a two-state solution, right? That was in 1993. 30 years later, what have we got? Absolutely nothing. Now, there were some advancements in some areas, as in we got the airport in 2002, They bombed it in 2002, in 2000, but they bombed it in 2002, right? So it lasted a whole of 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
My parents traveled through the airport. It was the best time they had. That didn't last long. Did negotiations ever get us any prisoners out? I don't remember. I simply don't remember. Did the resistance get us any prisoners out? They did, with Jalad Shalit, the Israeli prisoner, soldier that the resistance captured. They got 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for him, including some really high profile people.
Yes.
So I think it's ridiculous. I think that whole idea is ridiculous and uninformed. Let's just say uninformed. So highly ignorant, basically. Now, normalization, on the other hand, is a different story altogether. From normalization, I've listened to a video recently that describes normalization as an alliance, and I think it matches it more than the word normalization or a peace deal. A peace deal assumes that there was some sort of war beforehand, but there wasn't. Look at any of the states that have normalized. None of them were at war with Israel. None of them were at an active war with the Israeli entity. Now, Egypt and Jordan were, and normalized after wars, right? Their normalization deals are, even though they hurt, and even though, to us, they hurt, they're completely different than normalization deals done by other governments afterwards. So right now, if you look at Egypt, for example, they still say the Zionist enemy, for example, when they want to describe Israel, or they want to say Israel, they say the Zionist enemy, or the Israeli entity, enemy state, or they use these terms still in their media, in their education, between themselves as a people. Whereas if you look at the UAE, for example, after it normalized, you just simply see that as a complete abandonment of the Palestinian cause, as if it's a bypassing the Palestinian cause in order to serve our economical interests.
Yes.
And I could understand that if you didn't really have any sort of ideological backing. But if you claim to have any ideological backing, you can't really do that, because you're accepting that these people will have to continually suffer under Israel's control.
Yes.
I think that's majorly it. From when you look at some of these big countries that are making these decisions, what have they ever, since they started the normalization deals, what have they ever gotten the Palestinian people? The UAE, for example, normalized in exchange for the Palestinian people to stop the expansion of the settlements. Well, that's great if it happened. How long did it stop? 24 hours. And they continued again. Now, if you look back, and there was a video released recently, so I'm not even saying anything from my own accord, I'm saying from them. There was a video from the UAE ambassador to the US saying, our normalization deal with Israel has largely failed to get anything for the Palestinians. I think Sami also said that same point. Has largely failed to give anything to the Palestinians. So if you admit to that, then you know for a fact that you're not going to get anything, that you're dealing with an entity that is not really interested in any sort of peace. That entity conducted so many wars over the region, and it thrives on its sale of weapons. It thrives on it. So even if you manage to get it to stop, it will still find some conflict so that it can use its weapons on and start selling them. That's exactly what it's been doing in Gaza. For example, throughout the past 31 days or 32 days now, I think, in this current war, and I hope it ends soon, we've been hearing constantly about new sorts of weapons being used. Now, I lived in Gaza my whole life. I know what Israeli bombs sound. We know them by the sound, right? Imagine living under that situation to actually know a bomb by the sound. And we now many of my friends are telling me that these are completely new sounds, and these are doing completely new things. Like the seismic, for example, bombs that dig under the ground in hypersonic speed, dig like meters under the ground, then explode underground in a shaking motion that can shake the entire region as if like an earthquake.
Yeah.
There's other I don't know the name in English, thermobio or whatever, bomb that explodes. It's
midair.
Well, the one in midair is not that. That's the MK-82. That's an American bomb. Okay. It can explode in midair and it can explode when it hits. So it has two modes. You can choose. Sure. But this one, the way it functions is that it explodes. But the idea isn't to kill by shrapnel and everything.
Yes.
The idea is to kill by pressure. So if you've seen the photo of, the video from the spokesman for the Ministry of Health 2 days ago, he was holding a dead baby on the ground and speaking to the international community saying, stop this and help us, bring us some aid and stop the situation, call for a ceasefire. And it was a highly emotional, talk by that person as he's holding that dead baby. Like, imagine having to be like put in that situation to explain to the world that you're human and you deserve some empathy. The baby has no problems whatsoever. If you look at his body,
no blood,
nothing.
No
looks perfect.
Wounds.
He looks perfect.
Yeah.
And I was on the phone with one of my doctor friends, and he said this kid must have died from an inner explosion of his inner body parts. So these are weapons that we're not used to. Now, we're used to other weapons, which is still tragic, but these are things that we're not used to. White phosphorus is being used at an unprecedented rate, yes. Yeah. So even though they've used it before in 2008, including at UN schools, and we have that in photos, still disputed and being investigated in the International Criminal Court as if the photos and everything don't exist. And it's been used in Lebanon, but right now it's being used every single second. You need to just open Al Jazeera Arabic Live and just watch as they raise an entire city live on TV. And white phosphorus is being used constantly all over the area, and then they bomb it, and then they use white phosphorus again just to make sure that none of the people could even stay alive in the region or be able to flee. So in terms of weaponry, they keep using new weaponry constantly. So even if you manage to stop that for a while, they will need to find some kind of conflict, because the only reason they exist is to sell weapons. Like, I think that there's many reasons they exist, but one of the main reasons, one of the things that their economy lies on or relies on, is the sale of weapons. And the tragic thing in it is many Arabic countries buy the weapons. So they just wait for them to be used and they buy them, which is a huge tragedy.
Amr, one last question for you. I mean, just earlier today, I watched a video of two ambulance drivers. You may have seen this.
Yes.
They were drinking juice and laughing and saying, maybe this is the final drink we'll drink, and maybe our next drink will be in Jannah. And you saw a level of Iman which was just outstanding. It was perfection in some respects. When we observe from the outside, of course. And I want to ask you the question: what lies behind this fortitude, this resolve that we see amongst the people of Gaza? You're from this area. How do they exhibit, at such a time of adversity, such high levels of belief and faith?
I think you would be surprised by how much faith dire situations give you. So I would give the Gazan people, or the Palestinian people in general, we're resolute people.
Yes.
We would have disappeared if it hadn't been for 75 years of fighting. So I would give us some credit towards that end, but I would still also talk about how any people put under extreme oppression and constant violations of their rights, they will rise up and their faith will increase. Now, I don't wish that upon any person. It's a huge pressure to be under, and it's a huge bala. It's a huge strife.
Yes. Yeah.
And you could fail at the test. You could fail. But many people, I think the majority of people, their faith increases with the level of pressure they're put under. And I think we're no different. I look at the people of Bosnia and the level of faith they had during the war. I look at many of the other peoples around, like the Syrian people, the Uyghur population, the Rohingya in Burma and Myanmar, and it's always stories upon stories of people striving for their rights and their freedom, and with faith, with extreme faith, and you could still find people doing similar things, even with less, without a, let's say, an ideology of like grounded in Islam or in some sort of faith or an afterlife or something, like Vietnam, for example, and how they fought bravely against the U.S. occupation. But I think faith gives you a huge strength and resilience that other ideologies simply can't. That's why we saw the people of Afghanistan fight against the U.S. occupation barefoot for 20 years until they managed to get their freedom, and how the Iraqi people fought valiantly against the U.S. occupation, and of course, like the Afghanis, how they fought against the Soviet occupation beforehand. Yes. So we're looking at being put under extreme situations gives you strength and resilience. I think one of the reasons we have we get the feeling to fight on is because Palestine is a central issue for Muslims, right? It includes Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's the one country in the world that is still colonized. It is the one country in the world that is in the old way of colonizing, if you ignore the neo-colonialism. And it needs to be dismantled. So the entire world feels it. The entire world relates to it. So when we see the people all around the world rising up, going for protests, as we've seen around in London, in Washington, and of course in Baghdad, like 1 million people came up in Baghdad. In Jakarta, a few days ago, 2 million people in Jakarta. So we're looking at insane numbers of people willing to do anything, willing to go out in the streets and protest this. This gives us way more strength than you could imagine. And I think other peoples that don't have this kind of focus on their issues, I really feel sad for them. I really feel sad for them because of this point. The Uyghurs, like the problems that Indian Muslims face in India, they're unspeakable. Yeah. But we don't really see that much, that strong feeling of like solidarity that you're used to. Yeah. In the end, I just want to end on this point. We're really just people. We're really just people. We love life. We love each other. We love our friends. We love our families. We love our kids. I would do anything not to see any of my nephews or nieces get killed, for example. I would do anything. And I hope no harm comes to them over the course of this war, or any to come. We love food. We love to go out. We love to eat. We love to sit around with other people. We love to contribute. We love life. We're not a people that loves death and would like to do everything in just to achieve a cause or something. No, we love life. And we would be willing to do anything to live. But we value freedom more. We value freedom more than just simply living. And as long as we're living under this constant occupation, this constant oppression, this constant bombardment that Israel calls mowing the lawn in Gaza, and all of this oppression, we will keep fighting generation after generation. You can't really get rid of us. People will still rise up and want to keep fighting, not because we hate life, but because we love it. And that's I think the whole thing. That's the whole idea.
Rabbi Amr Abdul Latif, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.